God! Fuck! You fucking idiot! I got fucking tasered twice! 2 times!
Some actors save the world on screen, others unintentionally destroy the set off screen. Bruce Willis was the former until he became the latter. Behind the scenes of Cop Out 2010, what should have been just another action comedy turned into a quiet war, not with bullets, not with fists, but with silence piercing, calculated silence that broke a director from the inside out. Kevin Smith had idolized Bruce Willis his whole life. Then he directed him, and he came out of that set calling it a living hell. This wasn't about contracts or scandals. It wasn't about egos colliding and shouting matches. It was more chilling than that. It was a slow unraveling of trust, of respect, of the dream every filmmaker holds when they finally get to work with their hero. So what really happened? Why did Kevin Smith, a diehard Bruce fan, end up saying he never wanted to make movies again? This is the untold backstage story of Cop Out, a film where the only real action was off camera. A spark from each side, too small to fear, too quiet to stop. Picture this: Bruce Willis, the action icon who didn't need rippling biceps or war-torn growls to own the screen. Not Schwarzenegger, not Stallone. Bruce was the guy in the dirty tank top, bleeding through glass in Die Hard, stumbling into chaos and walking out alive barely. The reluctant hero, the last man standing. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He was inevitable. Now flip the lens. Kevin Smith, a walking IMDb with a hoodie. The dude who talked his way into Hollywood with nothing but a camcorder and a stack of comic books. His characters didn't save the world. They sat in convenience stores debating Star Wars like it was religion. From Clerks to Chasing Amy, he was indie cinema's unlikely king, caffeinated, chatty, proudly unpolished. 2 men, 2 cinematic galaxies. One, a box office juggernaut. The other, a fanboy turned filmmaker who still couldn't believe he was invited to the table. And in 2009, someone at the studio thought, why not put them together? Let's see what happens. It had the makings of a cult classic, or a complete meltdown. Spoiler, it was the second one. Bruce Willis wasn't the friendliest guy on set. But Hollywood looked the other way because Bruce had gravity. Ever since Die Hard blew up and he became something else, a steely legend. A man who didn't shout, didn't showboat, he just endured. Blood on his feet, soot on his shirt, eyes like he'd seen too much. In a post-Cold War world full of noise and chaos, Bruce was the quiet in the storm. And yes, he'd worked with the best. Tarantino in Pulp Fiction, Shyamalan in The Sixth Sense. So when Kevin Smith landed him, people scoffed. Please. If Bruce could handle Tarantino, Smith should be a weekend picnic. But Bruce wasn't about handling, he was about respect. And respect for him was currency earned, not assumed. If he thought you weren't on his level, he'd shut down, freeze you out, not with rage, but with absence. Directing him didn't feel like wrangling a diva. It felt like shouting into a snowstorm. And Kevin Smith, he showed up in a hoodie with a heart full of dreams, ready to play checkers with a man who'd already finished a chessboard. The dreamer meets the titan. Kevin Smith wasn't a visual genius. He didn't choreograph dolly shots or bathe actors in golden hour light. He just talked, and so did his characters. They rambled, they cursed, they argued about Star Wars in corner stores at midnight. They sounded messy, awkward, real, and millions of fans loved him for it. Because Kevin didn't make blockbusters, he made mirrors for the weird, the loud, the left out. He wasn't above them. He was them, the guy who turned a camcorder and a dream into a Hollywood ticket. A comic shop philosopher who spoke fluent nerd and wore his hoodie-like armor. Then came Cop Out, his first studio film, his first time directing someone else's script, his shot to cross the velvet rope. What happens when a comic shop dreamer gets handed a Hollywood legend? He got Bruce Willis, the man who turned Nakatomi Plaza into an inferno with nothing but a handgun, a radio, and a tank top soaked in blood. But what Kevin didn't know, that legend was about to turn his dream into a powder keg. A Handshake in the wrong season. One was an indie darling with a cult following. Never helmed a studio film. Never directed a bona fide movie star. The other, a Hollywood heavyweight with decades of hits and a reputation for being a handful behind the scenes. When Cop Out was announced, the press called it an odd couple with promise. Kevin Smith called it a dream. He gushed like a kid who just snuck onto the Die Hard set. I worship Bruce. I grew up on John McClane. Working with him, that was the dream. But dreams, when shaken hard enough, tend to crack. And Kevin woke up fast. A few weeks into filming, and the cold set air wasn't just the sound stage temperature. So here's the question. What do you do when you're a director standing in front of a legend? Do you bite your tongue and ride it out? Or speak up when things go off the rails? And if you're a fan turned filmmaker, do you really have what it takes to direct your hero? Kevin Smith found out the hard way. Between the long shoot days, the heavy silences, and a Bruce Willis who, more often than not, had absolutely nothing to say. A war you couldn't see, but everyone felt. Cop Out had no explosions, no bullets, no helicopters crashing through rooftops. This wasn't Die Hard, but something else detonated quietly. A kind of pressure that no one could name, but everyone could feel in their bones. What do you do when your set feels like a battlefield and the enemy won't even speak? On one side, Kevin Smith, the Joker trying to light up the set, cracking wise, keeping spirits high. On the other, Bruce Willis, walking in with the chill of a graveyard, like he wasn't there to shoot a movie, but to march into a silent war. Silence hits harder than yelling. Kevin Smith once said, Bruce walked onto set like someone had just murdered his dog. No smile, no small talk, no eye contact, and absolutely no jokes. At first, Kevin figured it was method acting, McClane mode, he told himself. But days passed, and nothing changed. It wasn't a role. It was Bruce. Every time Kevin called cut, Bruce didn't ask for notes, didn't give feedback, didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. And for Kevin, a director who fed off banter, brainstorming, and belly laughs, that silence wasn't neutral. It was suffocating. It didn't just kill momentum. It killed connection. When Reverence becomes a cage, Kevin once described directing Bruce Willis like this. You think you're steering the ship, but you're just a lever. The captain locked the wheel a long time ago. He didn't just admire Bruce. It idolized him. And that admiration, it paralyzed him. Kevin stopped giving notes, stopped pushing, stopped directing. He shrank into a shadow of himself, standing on a multi-million-dollar set, whispering to a legend who no longer seemed interested in listening. Once, in a scene that needed more warmth, Kevin leaned in and gently asked, could you maybe smile a little? Bruce didn't answer. Didn't smile. Just looked at him stone cold and walked off set. That was the moment Kevin knew this wasn't his movie anymore. He was just standing near it, not conflict, erasure. The worst part? It wasn't yelling. It wasn't chairs flying. It wasn't even disagreement. It was something colder. Bruce didn't argue with Kevin. He erased him. One producer recalled that Bruce never called Kevin the director. He called him that guy. Kevin later admitted, there was this one time Bruce looked right at me and said, "Why are you even here? I know what I'm doing." That wasn't tension. That was negation. He didn't just ignore Kevin's ideas. He ignored Kevin's right to exist in the room. A crew divided, a director alone. The crew split in two. On one side, the younger staff, camera ops, assistants, day players, they rallied behind Kevin. To them, Bruce was cold, distant, impossible to work with. On the other side, the veterans, grips, gaffers, sound guys who'd worked with Bruce for years. They shrugged and said, "That's just Bruce. You get used to it." And caught between those two camps was Kevin, the director, the one whose name was on the call sheet, but whose voice barely echoed on set. He couldn't yell at a megastar. He couldn't recast the lead mid-shoot. Worst of all, he couldn't control the movie that was supposed to be his, The Poison of Disillusionment. In a podcast after the shoot, Kevin Smith said something that stuck. "I've never hated making a movie more than I did then. Every day on set felt like I was falling out of love with filmmaking." For a man who once said, "I make movies to live, to breathe," it hit like a confession and a collapse. Bruce didn't scream at him, didn't sabotage the production. He simply drained the joy out of it. Cop out, then bomb. It made money. But Kevin, he walked away hollow. After that, he retreated. Back to fan-funded projects. Back to basement Q&As and films made for people who already knew him. Bruce moved on. More films, more sets. But he never worked with Kevin again. Never worked with anyone like Kevin again. So here's the real question. Does talent give you the right to be difficult? And if a director loses control of his star, is the film still his? Cop Out wasn't a box office failure. But for Kevin Smith, it was the most personal kind of loss, not in dollars, but in devotion. When the cameras stopped, the damage didn't. Cop Out hit theaters in 2010. An action comedy, loud, silly, harmless on the surface. But under the hood, it carried something fractured, a quiet, bitter fallout between two men who had once been icons. Icons of very different kinds. The film made over $55 million. Not a disaster, not a triumph. But box office numbers only tell part of the story. What Cop Out left behind wasn't just a movie. It was a scar, a timestamp on a partnership that broke before it ever really began, and no one involved ever forgot it. Kevin Smith, from The Fall back to The Fringe. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Kevin Smith started talking. Podcasts, late night shows, even his own memoirs. One quote kept coming back. "I didn't direct Bruce Willis. I just occupied the same room." At first, people pushed back, said no director should go public like that. But over time, heads started nodding, quietly. Especially inside the industry, Kevin's career didn't crash. It pivoted. He went back to smaller films, stranger films, films that sounded like inside jokes and felt like therapy. Red State, Tusk, Yoga Hosers. Low budget, full weird, deeply Kevin. He never returned to the studio system, never worked with another A-lister, and never apologized for any of it. In one interview, he said, "I thought working with a movie star was the dream. I was wrong. The dream is making movies with people who respect you." Bruce Willis, A Crumbling Monument. Bruce never addressed what happened, no interviews, no explanations. He never mentioned Kevin Smith again. No defense, no denial, just silence, the same silence he brought to the Cop-Out set. But over the years, that silence began to shift. It started to mean something else. Bruce kept making movies, lots of them. Cheap action flicks, sometimes 5 or 6 a year. Paper-thin plots, repeat roles, the kind of films that smelled like contracts, not passion. Slowly, the legend faded, and in his place stood a ghost of what once thrilled audiences. People started asking, was Bruce just burnt out, or was he hiding something? When the truth came out and everything changed, in 2022, the silence was finally explained. Bruce Willis announced his retirement from acting after being diagnosed with aphasia, a brutal condition that steals your ability to speak, understand, even remember. Hollywood froze. The same industry that had whispered about Bruce's distance, his detachment, now faced a truth they never saw coming. The critiques were reread, the eye rolls reconsidered, and for some directors, the guilt set in. Kevin Smith was one of them. The same Kevin who had once aired his pain across podcasts and pages now took to Twitter and wrote, "I was too childish. Our working relationship was tough, but I've always known Bruce was a legend. I send love to him and his family, wishing him peace." It wasn't an apology. It didn't need to be. It was something quieter, a reckoning, the fracture and the people inside it. No one won the cop-out war. Kevin lost his faith in the Hollywood machine. Bruce lost his sharpness, then slowly his voice. But what's left behind might be worth more than any victory. A human lesson that behind every creative clash are layers no camera can capture. Ego, exhaustion, misunderstanding, and sometimes illness. If Kevin had known Bruce was battling a silent condition, would he have chosen silence? 2. If Kevin had spoken up sooner, could they have met in the middle? We'll never know. But Cop Out, for all its laughs on paper, left something else behind on celluloid. A quiet tragedy in the shape of a comedy. An action film that didn't thrill, a buddy comedy that never found its rhythm, and above all, a story that ended without ever really beginning. A film that wrapped, but a wound still rolling. In Cop Out, Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan play cops. One tight-lipped, one loud-mouthed, thrown into a wild, ridiculous case. The movie ends with gunfire, laughter, and a handshake between partners. But off-screen, Bruce and Kevin Smith never got that moment. No handshake, no laughter, no goodbye. And that's what makes this story so haunting. It's not a scandal, it's a quiet tragedy that never got a final scene. Not all wars are loud. Hollywood has never run short on conflict. We've heard the stories. Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron at each other's throats on Mad Max, Fury Road, Dustin Hoffman driving Meryl Streep to tears on Kramer versus Kramer. Stanley Kubrick pushing The Shining so far. Shelley Duvall lost her hair from stress. But Cop Out was different. No screaming, no breakdowns, just two people who couldn't connect. And sometimes that's all it takes to kill a dream. The sharp edge of admiration. Admiration is a double-edged sword. Kevin Smith walked onto that set as a fan, and he paid for it with the shattering of himself in art where egos and emotions stretch tight as wire, walking into a partnership with pure reverence means losing sight of the line between the icon you worship and the collaborator you need, the silence that speaks too much. Bruce Willis didn't yell at Kevin Smith. He didn't insult him. He didn't push back. He just said nothing. But in a creative space, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the most terrifying sound of all, because it forces you to turn inward and ask the questions no one wants to ask. Did I do something wrong? Does he hate me? Am I just not good enough? And Kevin Smith, with all his credits, all his confidence, couldn't escape those questions either. The regret no one meant to cause. The most painful things are often the ones no one intended. Maybe Bruce was already sick long before anyone knew. Maybe Kevin let disappointment fester longer than he should have. No one was the villain in this story. Just two men caught in a moment that wasn't ready for them. Because sometimes the wrong timing can turn a simple collaboration into collateral damage, a flop of a film, a masterclass in humanity. Cop Out doesn't top anyone's favorite movie list, but it deserves a spot in Hollywood's most unforgettable behind-the-scenes stories, because it teaches us something deeper. Working with your hero doesn't always feel like living the dream. Art isn't just about vision, it's about listening, trusting, giving each other space to breathe. And sometimes real success isn't measured in box office numbers, but in how much respect survives by the time the credits roll. Cop Out was meant to be a buddy cop comedy. What no one expected? The toughest role wasn't on screen. It was playing co-star in real life.